if you're moving from iMovie to a Final Cut Pro, basically 6 things you have to get your head around. Okay, so let's roll into the first thing, and that is setting up your projects. So this is iMovie, and in iMovie, project setup is pretty straightforward. It's based on a library. So the iMovie library, which by default is in your movies folder, everything is in it. Your video clips, your audio clips, all your media clips. There's a database in there that keeps track of everything. Everything goes into the library. Everything you import, it's kind of convenient. It's convenient because you don't have to worry about stuff going somewhere, right? Everything's contained. It makes it easier to archive your projects. It makes it easier to hand your project over to someone else who's editing in iMovie because everything's together. Apple calls it a managed library. In Final Cut Pro, you have 2 choices with project setup. With Final Cut Pro, when you first open it up, you get an untitled library up here. The untitled library is in your movies folder, just like your iMovie folder. And you can start editing more or less in Final Cut Pro. You can start importing clips and things, and it'll go into that Final Cut Pro library. It's kind of like iMovie mode. You can have a managed library. However, you can do something different with Final Cut Pro in terms of the libraries. You can have external media. It means you can store your clips and all your media separately in another folder. If I click on this library and then go over to the right here to the inspector, you can see I have these settings here. Storage locations. If I click on that, so you can see right now, this is where you're storing things. So right now the media is stored in the library. I can choose a different location if I want to for external media. This stuff, motion content, is for Motion, Apple Motion, if you're bringing in motion files and stuff like that. It's their animation program. That's what where you can store this. And then your cache is like your render files, and usually you want to keep that in the library. And then Final Cut Pro backups. That's the one great thing about Final Cut Pro. It actually backs up your library in case something happens. But you can choose a different location for your media, because I just want to show you what it looks like to have external media. All right, so here I'm going to show you this Finder folder here. So this is my folder for this project, and here's the Final Cut Pro library, and I have it in a folder for the project. But you can notice here, down here, I have video. This is all these video clips. Now these aren't in the library. They're not in the Final Cut Pro library. They're separate in this folder. Final Cut Pro is not storing the media when you use external media. It's storing a reference to the media. So it basically links to wherever that media is. So if you move the media that's external, you break the link, Final Cut Pro says, where's the stuff? You may have seen this before in Final Cut Pro. You get all the red media that's unlinked. You have to relink, which is very easy in Final Cut Pro. That's the downside, not a major downside of storing your media externally, is that the links can be broken. Now, why would you want to have external media? A couple reasons. One is if you're working with other editors in sort of a networked environment, instead of everyone having their own copy of the media, say they're working on the same project, you would have it on a server, central server, and people would access the media, and that's the external media, so all your editors could edit. However, I find it useful to have external media when I want to use that media in another project. So say I'm doing a Final Cut Pro edit, but I want to use all those clips in, another edit, like a Motion or another project. Rather than have to hunt down and find it separately and put it in that project, it's there central in that folder. So it's easy. It's also easy to archive as well. So that's what I do a lot of time if I have media that I'm going to be sharing with other things I do. So that's when you would want to use external media. You don't have to, but that option is there. And that's just something to consider with Final Cut Pro. You can go the managed library route, or you can do the external media. The second thing is setting up projects. So when you're getting ready to edit. So in iMovie, when you're in the timeline getting ready to edit and you want to set the resolution and the frame rate of your project, in iMovie, there's no menu for that. It's set by the first clip you put in the timeline. In Final Cut Pro, on the other hand, you have controls. You can create a new project and you get all these controls. You can name it, you can use custom settings, or like iMovie, you can put a clip in the timeline in Final Cut Pro and it'll ask you, is this what you want the rest of the project to be set to? And you can say yes or no. Or you can get specific: video, resolution, format, frame rate, rendering, codec, audio, stereo. So you can fine tune your project settings. or you can use automatic settings. There's no real downside. It's just you have to be aware. You have to understand video resolution. You have to understand frame rate to set those things. You need to understand a bit about video and how it works. With Final Cut Pro, because Apple has, worked very hard to streamline the interface as much as possible, in that effort to keep things streamlined, some things can be hidden. Let me give you an example. Okay, so when I came to Final Cut Pro 10 and I looked at it, having come from Final Cut Pro 7, the one thing I always look for are the audio features. One of the big important things of audio is the audio meters. Where's the audio? Oh, wait a second. There it is. There's the audio meters. They're kind of small. I can't really do any real meaningful audio mixing with those little meters. I mean, it'll tell me if it's clipping. If it's too hot, it'll turn red. Where are like the big meters? And then it took me watching a tutorial, or no, it wasn't even watching a tutorial. I think I was reading through the user manual. That in order to bring up the big meters, you actually have to click on these little meters. And there's the big meters. Like there's no indication that I had to do that. But this is just one of the things with Pro applications, because they have to pack so much functionality in, and in terms of Final Cut Pro, to keep things streamlined and not overwhelm you, some stuff can be hidden and not intuitive to find. So you have to kind of click around, you watch tutorials, or you read, or just, explore. So the next thing I want to talk about is probably the most important part of Final Cut Pro. You need to understand this part, this thing, or you're dead in the water. You just won't. You're not going to be able to do much of anything. What am I talking about? Well, first let's go to iMovie for a second. Give you some context. Okay, so here we have our viewer, right, in iMovie. And then above the viewer, we have the toolbar. And we got our overlay settings and all our settings. We could do our color correction stuff, our matching, our color correction. We do our cropping. We can try stabilize shaky video. We got audio. We got speed adjustments. We can add clip filters here. And as well, the info pane here, where we can actually change the duration of clips. Everything's kind of there. Now, let's go over to Final Cut Pro. Over here on the right, this right here, make it a little bigger. This is the inspector in Final Cut Pro. This is the nerve center, if you will, of Final Cut Pro. This is where you do pretty much any adjustment, any controls are in the inspector. So you really need to understand how the inspector works, or you can't do much of anything in Final Cut Pro. So the inspector is broken down into areas. You can see up here, we've got these 4 buttons. It's kind of stacked panels. So this one right here is the video inspector. So if I have a clip selected here. So this is all the controls for this clip. So I can do stuff like scale it up, stuff like that. I can move it, position it, X, I can do Y, Control Z to undo that stuff. I can crop down here, so I can crop on the left. All kind of cool stuff that you can't really do in iMovie. And there's other things, stabilization. You can distort things. I mean, there's a lot of functionality in here. So you have a lot of control over your clips. So you need to understand this inspector, particularly if you start adding effects in Final Cut Pro, because this inspector can start getting a little hairy as you start to add things. Let me add distortions, crop feather. Just add it to this clip. It's going to just put it on top. So now I've got the crop and feather settings in the inspector, right? So I can go in and adjust those things. I can hide this. I can show it. I can turn it off, turn it on. Great, all that control. But as you get more of these things in the inspector, it can get kind of crazy. So you really need to understand how to navigate the inspector. This is where you also do the animation in the inspector using keyframes. So you see these little empty spaces over here on the side. These are the keyframe. This is the keyframe interface. So animating in Final Cut Pro uses keyframes like just about any other video application. So those are in the inspector as well. And that's just the video inspector. There's more inspectors. Here's audio. So here's the audio inspector, which kind of looks kind of different from other applications. So you have the volume control. 0 is kind of like It's not, doesn't mean that the volume's zero. It just means that's sort of the starting point, and you can drag it down to bring down the audio. You can see the graphic moving, or you can raise the audio. Any filters you add that are audio are going to be in this audio inspector. I should just mention down here this area because this confuses people. In every other video editor, Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve, when it comes to audio, they talk about stereo, mono. And when we talk about stereo, dual mono, that kind of thing, we're talking about audio channels. Final Cut Pro doesn't use that terminology. There aren't channels in Final Cut Pro. They refer to channels in Final Cut Pro as components. For example, if I go into a clip here and I say right-click on this clip, expand audio components, that's channels. Anyway, here in the audio inspector, any audio filters you put on will be here, and you can adjust. You can actually select the channels, the components that you want to actually listen to. If you had multiple channels, sometimes you get a video that has 1, 2, 3, 4 channels, components of audio, and you can turn them on and off depending on what audio you want to use. So that's the audio inspector. And then we have an info inspector, which is like, this is basically metadata of the clip, all this, like the name and, you know, what is it, and the channel. He says channels here, but not components. Anyway, information about the clip. And then here is the color inspector. And this one is wild when you first open it. This is the default color adjustment interface for Final Cut Pro. The color board, they call it. And these are referred to as pucks on the color board. So think shuffleboard, and you adjust color using these pucks. That is the color inspector. So any color correction filters and stuff will be in the color adjustments or the color inspector. So everything is in the inspector. Everything's centralized. My point of all this is this. You really need to understand this thing, the inspector, and how it works if you want to really use Final Cut Pro. It's not difficult to understand, but everything is there. So here is the thing that makes Final Cut Pro so different from other editors like Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve. And that is this whole concept of the magnetic timeline. Now, if you're using iMovie, you have experience with the magnetic timeline. In iMovie, they call this the main timeline. And then over here we have, on top of it, is the overlay track. And in the overlay track, we have connected clips, right? So here's a connected clip. This clip is connected to this, and it's over top. And we talk about magnetic as well. You can't put gaps in your tracks. That's part of the magnetic concept. There is a way, but that's a whole other video. But anyway, things stick together. You don't get gaps, and you're connecting things. So iMovie, like Final Cut Pro, is trackless. Editors like Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve use tracks. You see they have video 1, video 2, video 3 track, and they have audio 1, audio 2, audio 3, and so on. Not Final Cut Pro or iMovie, trackless. So in iMovie, we have the main timeline, we have the overlay track, and then we have clips connected. We have the music well down here, which is an independent track for music. So it's not connected. You notice there's no connection to any of these clips. But here is connected audio connected to these clips. Those are sound effects. The whole concept of that is taken to the greater degree with Final Cut Pro. And this is where people kind of go, what the what? So here, this right here is referred to as the storyline, the main storyline in Final Cut Pro. So again, Final Cut Pro, trackless. We don't have tracks. Don't say tracks around here, mister. We have storylines. So this is the main storyline. And then I have a bunch of connected clips connected to the storyline. And then I have clips connected to clips, which is what you can do in Final Cut Pro. In iMovie, you have one timeline. Go back again. So you have your timeline and overlay, and that's it. You can't, the only thing I can go above here is text. That's it, text track. But that's it, you got one. That's all. You can do a lot with one, but you're limited to one. And back over in Final Cut Pro, you can keep going all you want. Look at this one. I got a title there, and then I got another one. And so all of these things, you can keep going, right? So it's storyline and connected clips. So that throws people. But here's what really throws people, is that you can have other storylines. You can have connected storylines connected to the main storyline. What? Okay, I got an example over here. So you see here how this clip, just looks like a connected clip. We got the title there. And then this clip and this clip are surrounded by this gray outline, this gray box. What's that about? Well, what that tells me, or tells you, is that these two clips are actually in their own storyline. This is a storyline. This is like having your own timeline. It's like a separate timeline. Now, why would you want to do that? Why can't we just use connected clips, Mike? Why do we have to have another storyline? So let me go to iMovie. Is probably the better example. So I have these two overlay clips, these two cutaways. And let's say, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to put a transition in between these two clips. Look at dissolve. Okay, let me just do that. Grab my cross dissolve. Yeah. Nope. Can't do it. Can't do it. Doesn't work. Can't put a transition between two connected clips here in iMovie. Likewise, if you've ever tried to move it, right? Let's say I want to move this over a bit. It totally disregards the clip in front of it and starts to overwrite it. It's like it doesn't respect it at all. So this is the behavior of connected clips in iMovie. And it's the behavior of connected clips in Final Cut Pro as well. Same kind of thing happens. However, and say I want to put a dissolve between here. This is where connected or secondary storylines comes in. So I can put, let me just go over, and I'll just grab this. I can put, watch what happens when I put, boom. See what happened? I put the dissolve in there, and it automatically changed this into its own connected storyline. Because a connected storyline is like its own timeline. It's independent. That's what this gray outline is. I can also rearrange clips because it's like its own timeline. I can't do that with connected clips. Connected clips will ignore all that stuff. So you can have storylines on top of storylines. And that's the concept you have to understand in Final Cut Pro. It's trackless. It doesn't use tracks. It uses storylines. So a complex project in Final Cut Pro becomes a bunch of storylines with connected clips with connected storylines. And that's what throws people in terms of editing in Final Cut Pro. So I talked about the storylines and that whole concept of storylines and connected storylines, and there's no tracks. And the same thing goes for audio. So back here in Final Cut Pro, and you can see I have audio tracks here. Right, so this is actually music, and then I've got, let me just zoom in a bit here. I've got as things redraw, the sync sound with the on cameras. So let me actually use this as an example. I'm going to come in here with this selected and expand audio components. And there is the audio that goes with that video. And notice what happened. Everything pushed down. So in Final Cut Pro, again, no tracks. No tracks for audio, no tracks for video. However, what you can do with audio and video to a certain extent is you can basically label it to organize it. You can see how these are color-coded, right? These blue tracks mean dialogue. Now notice the music is blue. But I can change that. I can change it. So if I go right-click on it, just right-click, assign audio roles. This is essentially like labeling things. So right now, this is labeled as dialogue. It's not dialogue, it's music. So I'm going to put music. And it changes color to green. And I can do the same thing here. Right-click. I'm going to label this as music because it's music. And you can do that with sound effects. You can do that with anything. You can label anything, and you can create different labels. So you might say, well, what's the big deal with that? If I go over here to the index button, you can see I have all these different roles. Titles are purple, video is blue, and then in the that's the video section. And then in the audio section, dialogue is blue, music is green. If I click this button, notice what happened. See how that audio went away? It didn't go away. It just minimized. It's still there. But it's out of the way now because I just want the music to show up so I can work with it. Likewise, I can do that. Okay, I don't want to look at the music right now. I want to look at the dialogue. So you can actually organize based on roles. And that's what's very cool in Final Cut Pro. And you can have all kinds of roles and you can organize things more and more. You can create sub roles, as they call them. I'm just clicking around some of this stuff just to show. So you can move things around and you can move them into lanes. So you can organize things in lanes. So here's all the music in this lane. And you can have one for dialogue, right? So basically my point is this. There's no tracks, but it uses what's called lanes. So you basically label the different types of audio you're using, and you can assign them and have them appear or disappear, whatever, using this index function over here. So I can down here it says show audio lanes, hide audio lanes. So that's how you organize stuff in particular in Final Cut Pro. It's not the most intuitive way, but when you think about it, it's kind of very cool because it's like tagging things and then organizing it. So you can manipulate and you can look at things and work with things easier without being constricted by tracks. But that's one of the things you have to sort of get your head around. Once you do, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool, the flexibility. Organizing and getting to what you need to edit, particularly with audio, is way easier with roles and lanes once you understand it.